everyone. Today, we are speaking with Eric Broda. He's a senior technology executive, delivery specialist, and chief architect with a proven and established track record helping many financial services firms. He has developed enterprise transformation and data strategies for many companies. He is a published author and a top 6% contributor ranking globally on Stack Overflow. This is the stat is the most impressive one, because if any dev will know that their actually life depends on people like Eric giving all the solutions free, completely selfless service on Stack Overflow. So Eric, thank you for doing that, helping everybody else. And I would like to know a little bit more about yourself before I can ask some questions on data mesh.
Sure. First off, Rafat, thank you very much for having me on the show. I'm honored to have the opportunity to talk with you. I run a very small boutique consulting firm called Broda Group Software that helps financial services firms accelerate their data mesh journey. I have personally implemented and designed modern data architectures, data mesh, data products, data ecosystems, data marketplaces at global insurers, large banks, as well as even smaller fintechs. And these have led to some pretty radical improvements in time to market, customer engagement, and obviously better and faster insights. So one of the reasons why we try and move forward with data mesh. So once again, thank you for having me on the show.
Sure, welcome. So Eric, my first question is, what problems data mesh is solving?
Sure. There's a lot of ways to answer that question, but I'll try and be relatively succinct and concise. So first off, today, and this is what I'm hearing from my clients and what I'm reading online. I'm sure you, as an executive at a financial services firm, have probably seen. But today, data is just plain simple, hard to find, consume, share, and govern. And this applies even more so in the analytics environment. We have these centralized silos of data. We can call them enterprise data warehouses or data lakes or data lake houses and all that kind of stuff. And with those centralized silos of data, what we have is centralized teams that manage those silos. Now, ultimately, I think we all know, and it's probably no surprise that with this centralized team, what we get is a bureaucratic, slow, and cumbersome process. Now, to make matters worse, these structures are largely not understanding the clear implications of Conway's Law. And for those that haven't heard of that, Conway had this really wonderful observation that is I think it was several decades ago when he came up with this, but it's stayed true. Effectively, Conway's Law says that your systems and data will follow your organizational structure, or more specifically, your decision-making funding structure is what it'll follow. So if you centralize, you're really ultimately swimming upstream. And when you swim upstream, you get fatigue. Your consumers get tired, your data producers get tired, and your funders, the people that are funding the work that you're doing, get tired too, which is probably the worst thing you can actually have in this situation. So what does data mesh actually do? And in particular, data products, they simply put, make data easy to find, consume, share, and govern. Data mesh and data products encourage thinking differently, I suppose, is the best way to say it. We think as data as a product. So we apply product thinking to data, where product thinking has long time horizons. We have this formal notion of producers and consumers, and we have formal interaction mechanisms. Data products and data mesh also encourage very clear boundaries and empowered owners that drive, as opposed to the centralized mechanisms that we talked earlier, they drive local autonomy, people that are closer to the business, and clear accountabilities. Data mesh and data products talk about self-serve. And what that really means is we have the ability for data engineers, data analysts, developers to actually do their job without intervention from a third-party group or a centralized organization. So we talk about things like data products having registries that are there specifically to enable discovery, observability, and operability. And last but not least, we talk about data mesh addressing that centralized structure, again, we're making centralized structures into data products, and we would have many data products as opposed to one centralized thing. But what we have now is with these distributed and federated data products, what we have is federated governance. Now, why is that so important? The reason is with the clear boundaries, the empowered owners, the data products, which are relatively granular, what we get is localized autonomy for faster decisions. And from a federated governance perspective, the data product team implements the governance process that are still mandated at the enterprise level. So the enterprise still has a role, but the actual implementation happens by an agile, nimble team, namely the data product team. And just to reiterate, for those that if you're listening to this podcast, you probably know what a data mesh is. But to make it really simple, there's a lot of definitions out there, but a data mesh is plain simple an ecosystem of data products. So when I talk about all these attributes of the data product, what that really says is I'm taking advantage of the federated distributed nature to drive localized autonomy, encourage decision-making to be made closest to the business, which, as you can see, is exactly opposite to the centralized nature of the typical analytics organization that we talked about. Now, ultimately, and this is, I'll close with this here, is by doing this and using the data mesh and the data product techniques, what we do is we actually make data easier to find, consume, share, and govern. It's actually that simple.
This is a very good definition you gave me about data mesh and what problems it is solving. And the key word when I think about data mesh is about decentralization. We used to build these data warehouses, bring all the data at a central space, and so everybody can build reports on that. That was a big progress. Then data scattered all around the enterprise. But as you know, we are doing this thing for 10, 20 plus years. And now we are saying the data warehouse may not be the right pattern. So what I'm wondering, because the old habits die hard. So what I'm wondering is, when I'm building the data mesh, what are the anti-pattern you see in the industry? Basically, I want to know what we should not do when building a data mesh products.
Sure, that's a great question, actually, Rafat. I think there's probably 3 or 4 things that I would think about. The very first, perhaps the most obvious one, is if you're taking a technology-first approach, you're probably doing it wrong. And the reason I say that is the whole purpose of data mesh you don't get decentralization or federated organizations for free. There's a cost in doing that. So you're looking at a benefit that's commensurate with the cost. What that really means is you have to understand how what you're doing with the data mesh is going to impact the business. So if you take a technology-first approach, you're not thinking of the business outcomes. So the first thing I see organizations do, and I try and help them fix this, to be honest with you, is where they take a technology-first approach. I'm thinking about, my Trino query infrastructure, for example, as opposed to thinking about, how am I going to actually deliver product to market faster for my business? How do I drive better, faster, and perhaps even more inexpensive, cheaper insights for my business? And what would that do? So you start with the end in mind, the business outcome, and then identify the technology that is fit for purpose. Second thing I see is organizations trying to do data mesh using their centralized team. Now, we'll probably talk about this a little bit later around the operating model, but ultimately, data mesh is about a federated, decentralized, distributed capability. And you can't do that with your old centralized team. You have to actually think differently. If you don't do, if you try and do it with your central team, you're not going to get the local autonomy, the speed, or the agility. And ultimately, again, you're going against Conway's law. So you're almost doomed to failure. Now, there's ways, and notice I said trying to do data mesh with a centralized team is an anti-pattern. There's a lot to be said about doing data mesh, applying data mesh to your centralized data We can talk about that a little bit later if you wish. But the key here is don't do data mesh using your centralized team. It's not going to work. Or if it's going to work, it's going to be extremely painful, slow, and expensive, and arguably not delivering the benefits you want. The second, or third rather, anti-pattern is trying to apply a one-size-fits-all platform or technology platform to data mesh. Now, here's why this is it's not necessarily intuitive. Like most organizations will say, well, we've invested in all these cool things. We ought to be using it, if not forcing people to use it. And that again runs counter to the data mesh, federated, distributed, data product capability that we're talking about. In fact, as I mentioned earlier, data product owners, are empowered. And what that means is they are enabled and allowed to make their own decisions. They're the king of the castle, if you will. They decide which platform to run on, which interfaces to expose, how to address their customer needs, and how to work with producers to get the data they need. Now, of course, they ought to be provided the incentives to accommodate enterprise technologies. But again, it's about autonomy. So what I've seen is empowered data owners, and where it works is they're not forced to use a technology, but rather the data product owner comes to the conclusion that it makes sense to leverage the enterprise API platform because somebody has already built in the operability, observability, and all the heavy lifting. So what I'm saying is that the data product owner is empowered. That doesn't say they go against enterprise decisions, but they're not forced to use them. Okay. In fact, what I have seen is, data product owners, based off of the type of data that they have in their data product, likely will be using different tools. So some of them use Trino to access it. Some of you are sitting on a Snowflake platform. They shouldn't be forced to use Trino. They should use the Snowflake platform in many cases. Some are on-premise using Postgres, which leads you to a very different data product architecture. The key there is if I tried to do a one-size-fits-all, forcing a technology platform, what we're not going to get is the benefits that we expect from an empowered data product owner. In fact, we'll probably get the opposite. The last thing I would mention is some folks try to take a big bang approach. And when I say that, I don't mean that their scope is to put data products everywhere in the enterprise. But what they're trying to do is do too much at once. Now, here's why this is important to understand is a big bang probably won't work. Unless you have a very large pot of money and a lot of time on your hands. And here's why. Data mesh is at an early stage. And what that really means, especially it's an early stage in the industry, but it obviously would be early stage in the organization that's trying to do it. What that means is you need a test and learn, an incremental approach that should be taken. You should be looking at POCs, proof of concepts, and then MVPs, and use those MVPs to seek sponsorship from senior executives, and then demonstrate success, and then use that success to drive the next MVP and the next MVP, and eventually you get to a factory approach, perhaps where you take those lessons learned and create some repeatable processes around how to create data products, for example, and maybe then seek to do an enterprise rollout. All that takes a little bit of time. Now, that being said, it doesn't mean it takes 24 months to get a data mesh. In fact, I've done it in significantly shorter time. What it says is, the definition of done is important to understand. So typically what I've seen is within a 9-month period, easily, we usually get 3 or 4 MVP data products out into production, demonstrate the capability, demonstrate some real business value, and then along the way, start to think about what it means to build a factory to accelerate the rollout. So as you can see, that's the exact opposite of the Big Bang approach. So those are kind of the 4 things that I think of as anti-patterns.
Perfect. Yes, I completely agree with you that take small steps and don't try to do Big Bang, because then nothing works. So many people get involved and departments and all. And in big enterprise, anything you try to do very big at one go, it's doomed to fail. But one thing is, I want to know a little more about, you were saying that don't try to build this with a centralized team. So what is the reason of you advising against a centralized team? Because what I feel, I have a centralized team, which is managing this data warehouse. There's a lot of people who understand data, databases, ETL, and all those things. Can I just take them and send them to the domain and say, take this one to domain and build me a data product? Or you see there's a problem, or the old thinking will come there. So what is the reason behind saying don't use the centralized team?
Well, the goal that we have with the data mesh and the data products is to enable agility, speed, which again delivers time to market, better, faster insights. If you have a centralized team, what you end up having is that cumbersome bureaucracy that is completely the opposite of the nimble, agile model that we want to get. So to use your example, if you wanted to go to data mesh, what you have is you have an existing investment in centralized data. Okay. Mm-hmm. What you want to do is you want to identify, you want to take a slice of that data. So again, this is a very common problem. I have a centralized data warehouse. What is data? How does data mesh apply? Well, here's how it applies. Is you need to look at that and say there are some obvious logical domains in that enterprise database. We'll trivialize them and we'll say, let's pick the customer domain. And what we want to do is we want to identify who is the empowered owner who gets to make decisions around how we expose that client data, customer data, who gets to use the customer data, and what is the technology platform and capabilities that are necessary to meet the needs of that customer, which may be different than your general ledger domain, which may sit in, or your payments domain, which may sit in your enterprise data warehouse. So really what you want to do is you want to sit there and say, I'm going to create that empowered owner who owns, in this example again, that customer slice of data, and I want to allow that individual to build their team, okay, and seek out their producers who creates that data, seek out the customers who consume that data, and work with them to deliver what they actually need, okay? And that may mean, for example, that data product owner will say that while the data sits in, for example, Teradata or whatever you may happen to be using, I'm going to expose it using this type of APIs. And you know what? This particular set of clients wants to listen for when data changes as opposed to querying it all, once a day or getting batch files. So maybe that data product owner says, I need to set up an event listening type thing where I have change data capture, and any change in data goes onto a Kafka topic, and somebody's actually listening to that data, listening for that data, which other data product owners may not need. But if you have the centralized team, the constant dialogue is, well, why would we do that for one customer, okay, or two customers? So what ends up happening is the ability to meet the needs of individual data product owners to drive the agility and nimbleness that you're looking for is not feasible if you go with the centralized team, because its very nature is addressing bigger problems rather than specific, localized, and arguably smaller problems. So that's the fundamental reason. And one of the first things that I usually end up doing is taking a look at the centralized data warehouse, the centralized team, and seeing, is there a better way that we can actually meet the needs of the consumers, be they reporting, for regulatory purposes, for customer engagement, or AI machine learning. And you can see every one of those has slightly different needs. And AI machine learning arguably is has different needs than the customer engagement capability. So again, the centralized team it's not that you can't do it. It's just harder to work, and it's not the normal nature to have a centralized team meet the needs of all, this universe of customers. However, if you have one owner who knows their consumers and their producers, it becomes a relatively simple exercise for them to understand the needs and to actually address those needs.
Perfect. Question I have is, we were talking about customer master. And if I see my company, we have a couple of different products. And all these products line have customers. And at the end of the day, I have a customer master build because I'm getting my customer from all these product line and in one centralized place. And there are a lot of products people use to manage their master. So I have a customer master. So my question is, can I just put an API on top of my customer master and that becomes one of my first data product? So you get the customer from here. Same way I will have maybe partner master. So product master. And these can be my first data products?
They sound like, based on just the initial description you gave, they sound like great candidates for being your first set of data products. Because again, from what I heard, and what I'm going to assume is the customer master is a relatively granular domain. You probably, and one could argue that your product, every one of your product lines is another domain, another data product. So what that says to me is with your customer master, you have an identified set of consumers. You can wrap some APIs around those. You can wrap some queries around those. And you probably have an organization structure to actually understand your customers, your producers, and be able to manage their needs. Now, where I would say that typical larger organizations run into challenges is they do have, customer master comes with all sorts of extra baggage. So I'll give you a simple example. The fact that you mentioned as customer master probably means that you have some kind of master data management capability. So here's the challenge that you have is you can dramatically increase the cognitive load required by the team and the size of the team and hence the bureaucracy by putting too much into the data product. So here's what I typically see is with a customer master type capability, what we do is we hive off the master data management capability and they become a producer to the customer master team. Okay, and what that means, so the difference here is the customer master team owns the data, the MDM or master data management team owns the processes by which you're cleansing the data. Okay, and deduping it and aligning the keys and all that kind of cool stuff that you normally do. So what ends up happening is we decouple those teams. Okay, and the customer master team now becomes the data product owner that's responsible for understanding their consumers, reporting agencies, whatever your thing, and for ensuring working with other teams to get the data and working with the master data management team, for example, to ensure the quality of the data. So that's typically what we see. So the example that I'm going to use, I'm going to mention a book that I go to time and time again is a book by, it's called Team Topologies by Matthew Skelton and Manuel Paes. If you're going to do data mesh, that is a book that will give you tremendous insights into what the operating model is required, not just because their context isn't necessarily just data mesh, but IT organization structures and why you structure things one way or another. But the learnings in there and the recommendations are perfect for what you're thinking about for a data mesh. And in fact, if you think about the operating model, and I can go into depth, I think we're probably going to progress into a separate question on that. But there's a lot of good information out there to help you figure that out. So there's some general principles almost that you can apply that get you to the conclusion that I just mentioned, which is you're going to segregate your teams. That master data management becomes typically what we call a complex systems team, where you have very specific purpose and very specific skill sets that you need. And the customer master team becomes your data product, more closely aligned to your data product. But we'll cover that perhaps a little bit later.
Sure. No, this is very helpful because these are some practical questions many people are trying to answer, especially in our data world. We already had this data warehouses and master data management systems where we have this data. So it seems like this can be a quick win towards the path to data mesh, that I can set a product saying, here's my first data product called customer, call these APIs, get the data so you can get started. So second question I have is, what kind of operating model changes a company must make to be successful in the journey of data mesh?
Sure. Now, again, in this context, I'm going to lean heavily on the team topologies book, just primarily because the concepts there have been articulated much better than I ever could have. In fact, what I found before I read the book, I ended up implementing these operating models. And learning it the hard way, I suppose. But when this book came out, it was like, this is exactly what I've been doing for a long time. Now, the reason that the operating model question is so important, I'm glad you asked it, Rafat, is even Zhamak Dehghani, the visionary for the whole data mesh concept, has said it's a socio-technical capability. What that means is obviously the technical, we kind of know what that means, but the socio side of the socio-technical word means that there's some pretty significant organizational implications. And when we look at the organizational implications, the answer, is what is your operating model to address the organizational challenges or needs of a distributed or federated and decentralized capability. So again, referencing the book that I mentioned here, they have four types of teams. They have something called stream-aligned teams, and these are the end-to-end delivery. They take something from concept all the way through into production. They eat what you kill, as they say. They run what they built. And then there's three other types of teams. There's what they call enabling teams, and these are helpers. They kind of fly in, help the stream-aligned teams do what they need to do, and then they leave. There's platform teams that make the underlying technology used by the stream-aligned teams easy. For example, they may have an expertise in APIs or event streaming or something like that, or change data capture that may be out of bounds for a nimble, agile, stream-aligned team. So these folks, the platform team, makes technology easy to use, allowing the stream-aligned teams to become more agile and more nimble. Then there's what we call complex systems teams, and this is where you have master data management as an example. That's a pretty distinct skill where you're using like fuzzy matching or even AI machine learning to join, references from multiple different data sources to identify the master. That's a pretty rarefied, hard to find skill set. So that's where that capability would lie. So now, what I find is the data product team actually is the stream-aligned team, and to use again the context from the book. So the data product team delivers the data product end to end. They ingest the data. They're responsible for ingesting the data, the quality of the data that comes in, and obviously working with the producer team to make sure it's cool. They're responsible for understanding what the consumers want, how they want the data, and to serve that data in as seamless and transparent a fashion as possible. So the data product team, and oh, by the way, end-to-end, in the spirit of end-to-end, when things go bump in the night, the data product team also resolves those issues end-to-end. So what we see is a data product team typically is, again, the stream-aligned team is anywhere from 6 to 9 team members. And you typically have an owner, obviously. And when I say the owner, they're not a figurehead. They are somebody who has intimate knowledge of the business domain. They're typically very strong on the business side and the technology side. Yes, I know one of the first comments is we don't have too many of those people. But that ultimately is the ideal owner. And to the extent that you can compromise some of that, I would compromise a little bit on the technology side, but maintain the strength in the business because you have other team members. So I typically see 4 to 5 developers and engineers in this data platform team. They are responsible for, from the developer side, creating perhaps the APIs or the queries that the consumers may need. Data engineers, for example, may address some of the pipelines for getting data into the data product. So I have 4 to 5 developers/engineers. I typically expect to see a full-time architect, somebody who they're typically a very senior person. They're typically hands-on. They're now not the PowerPoint architect of old. They are typically the individual who understands how all the moving parts work. They're typically an engineer also. So they may be one of the engineers, but they're the most senior engineer, the tech team lead person. I see a UX person, a user experience person, mostly because we'll talk about this perhaps a little bit later, but this whole notion of a registry and being able to expose data and make it discoverable means that there's not just API capability. I can ping, for example, a discovery endpoint, which the developers could implement, but there typically is a UX, a user experience, a user interface component that allows, mere mortals, as I call them, but the regular data scientists, the data analysts, the reporting analysts to actually consume data in the data product. So as a UX person, and then I also see, to round out the team, a crucial role, mind you, somebody, a DevSecOps person, somebody who, and I emphasize the security in the DevSecOps. You can't do without that, or else you'll be going, doing this security obstacle course for a long, long time. But that's the person who helps the team, has the expertise in not necessarily the data product, but the Jenkins pipeline or the GitHub Git Actions or what have you, whatever you use for your DevOps cycle. They also have a knowledge of security to make sure that what happens inside the product is safe, and they have some operational expertise, so they know that the data product can be supported and integrated into an enterprise operations type environment. So that's the typical team. And I only see one other team that is typically involved outside of the four that I mentioned from the book. But it's a pretty important role, and it's typically shared across multiple data products, a steering group. This is the group that provides some, they do two things. One is they obviously provide some insight, but if it's structured well, they also become the executive sales force, the executive salespeople for your data product, and they help you find new consumers or help you, remove obstacles from doing your job. So the steering group is typically senior executives. They act like a board on a regular company, but they provide that executive level impetus to help move things forward while also providing the normal insight. And they typically get involved in funding discussions and such, especially at the starting of a data product's life cycle.
Cool. So, Eric, I want to quickly clarify one thing. As you said, now we have to build this team with different people for building a data product. As you know, I have multiple businesses, so I'll have multiple data products. That means I have to have multiple these data team, I'll call them, who should have all these different roles you described. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I need a DevOps person. I need the UI person, or I need somebody who writes API. And all these people are sitting, say, I have a platform team because my DevOps is a centralized team for all the products. I don't want everybody to write the Jenkins pipelines. Nobody should reinvent the wheel. Nobody should do the monitoring of the production services. So I see that we say that every team must have these roles, but these roles can be filled with centralized team. Why I am saying it again, because initially when we started, we said we don't need the centralized team. But on the other hand, for different roles, we can leverage the centralized team. So there's a difference between a centralized data warehouse team and this is a centralized platform team, which is doing many of the roles can be fulfilled by the centralized team. They can go to different product, help them write APIs, do their monitoring of services, DevOps pipeline. Maybe I'll have just one team which is setting up my catalog for the whole enterprise and every other API plugin in that catalog. So I just wanted to make sure that we are on same thought.
Yeah, absolutely. So what you're specifically highlighting is the need for the platform teams, right. But you also find there's a need for an enabling team, and sometimes even depending on your context, a complex system team. But here's the difference: is you're probably going to have, as you already highlighted, many data product teams. Okay. The majority of your headcount will be in your various data product teams. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, in other words, what I typically see is your platform teams will be, probably 1/5 to 1/10. Again, depending on what type of technology you're using and how new it is, 1/5 to 1/10 of your staffing complement. So the vast majority of your teams are capable end to end, okay, And you may come back and say, maybe there's some overlap. Maybe I can synergize, get some synergies. Now, there is a role for synergy. Okay. So for example, it does make sense to have a central platform team that, doesn't reinvent the API wheel. Okay. But again, the platform team should be small, very fit for purpose, and they should be, their explicit job is to make the technology, they're like the tools team. They make the technology easy to use. They should not be that big. Okay. The DevOps team, again, I look at it and I go, these should be experts in instrumenting and setting up the infrastructure to allow mere mortal engineers to build DevOps pipelines. Okay. So if you have a centralized team building all the pipelines, you've kind of negated the fact that you want your data product team to be empowered. Now, here's the dilemma that you always face is in the old world, the centralized world, we optimized for cost. Okay. And what we did is we sacrificed agility and speed. In the new world, you ask any of your business executives, do you want lower costs or would you like your products to market in half the time or 2 months earlier? And would you be able to meet the market needs in 1 quarter as opposed to 2? I know what the answer is going to be is get me speed and agility every single time, because even if you shave 10% off your IT budget, it is a nit relative to getting a new product to market. Okay. Or entering a new geography, or improving your customer satisfaction rating by a few points. The business wins every day because that's where the money is. That's where the revenue is. So in the new world, what we do is we optimize for agility and speed, recognizing there may be some duplication. Okay. There may be an extra cost, but again, you're emphasizing and prioritizing agility and speed as opposed to cost. So what does that practically mean? There's no perfect answer. But what you want to do is those, quote, centralized team, the platform team, the enabling team, the complex system team, you want to make them as lean and mean and as fit for purpose as you can. And you want to invest in the teams, the stream-aligned teams that deliver the real value, these data product teams that are close to the business, that drive the new, getting into new markets or delivering better, faster insights or creating a brand new model that allows, a 4% improvement in underwriting capability. That's where you want to focus your attention. So it's really a question of priorities and balance. But I can tell you in financial services today, insurers, banks, payment companies, and all the like, fintechs, as well as the big guys, it's all about agility. Now, they may, that may mean slightly different things in terms of fintech versus a big bank, but the priority is agility and speed. Make no mistake about it.
True. And I think it's very, very good point. I hope people caught this because you answered already my next question, which I was thinking to ask you, is how I can go to businesses and tell them increase your expense because I want to build this data product, this data mesh. Because today they say my business is running and some people come in night, take my data, create reports and all. Of course, they are suffering, but that's not my problem. Whatever they do it, but I get my reports, so my business is working. Now you come out of nowhere and telling me that increase my expenses to build this data mesh product, but I think you explained it very well. The agility you will get, the performance improvement, the moving fast in the market will trump the expenses as such.
Yeah. Now it's important to so first off, spot on. Now here's how you go about doing that. There's two approaches. The old centralized technology team would say, in the old days, they'd say, give us 2 million, 5 million, 10, whatever the number is, and we're going to build this really cool, shiny toy that, trust me, will change the way your business runs. And the business looks at you and go, give me an example, and you can't. The new approach that I've been very successful with, so practitioners' word of advice, lessons learned, I suppose, is when we implemented data mesh at another large organization, what we did, the very first thing we did is we went to the business, specifically, the SVP in one particular area, and we looked for business opportunities. And we found, like I said, we found one or, there's two or three that we actually found. But the key thing about it is we found a sponsor who said, yes, I need to get into this new geography. I need to, address this new particular need with my advisors or whatever the case may be. Okay. And they then said, if you can do that and get me into market 6 months earlier than I could, that's worth millions of dollars, tens of millions. Okay. Mm-hmm. And we said, well, to do that, here's what we need to invest. Okay. We're not asking for the intergalactic $10 million investment. We're going to say is we're going to build this one thing called a data product. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to satisfy the very first use case, the MVP, is we're going to build that data product for you. Okay. But we're going to build in a smart way so that the analytics group can also use it. Okay. So what we did is we got data from a legacy system source. We added some change data capture, moved the data through, populated this new repository, this new data product on the cloud. And then we provided, again, that data to allow that SVP to go into market, into the particular geography, the new particular audience. I won't go into specifics for obvious reasons. But what we found is that was the same data that the AI machine learning team wanted and the reporting team wanted. So now what we did is we ended up building that first one to meet a specific need, but made minor tweaks to it as we found new customers. Okay. And all of a sudden what ended up happening is we built some momentum. Okay. And we had a huge success story that led us into the next one. This SVP talked to another SVP, and lo and behold, this person said, this is the team that's going to get you to where you need to go. And we ended up building the next series of MVPs. So now what ends up happening is you focus on the business outcome to kickstart, energize, and build momentum. And that was kind of the key to success.
Perfect. Yeah, that's very good. So my next question is, as you've seen that many companies implemented data mesh successfully, but what I want to know is why you seen that some companies fail in implementing data mesh. So what are the top reasons the companies fail in implementing this data strategy based on data mesh?
Sure. They're related to some of the anti-patterns, I suppose. But first off, and I'll probably answer relatively quickly because I think I don't want to repeat myself. But data strategies fail if you're focused on technology and not business outcomes. For the obvious reasons. The business, to be honest with you, does not care about vague notions of data quality. In fact, they don't care about data mesh.
True.
It's another technology term. And even data products, although any executive that runs a line of business understands products, data products may be a little bit easier to understand, but unless you link it to business outcomes, it's just another technology widget that was promised, I'm sure years before. You're not going to get to where you want to go. So align yourself to business outcomes. So for a data strategy to be successful, it has to start with, this is where the business wants to go. You should absolutely positively have 3 or 4 use cases that bring the business strategy to life, that some executive has actually said, this is important to me and will deliver X amount of revenue or what have you. Those become your MVPs that you test drive your data strategy. And that, though, in the data mesh context, those are your first data products that have a built-in sponsor, a built-in funding mechanism that allow you to actually deliver something that is of interest to the business. Now, here's why this is so important. A data strategy for any enterprise that's of size, any large insurer, any large bank, or even medium size for that matter, if you recommend a data strategy, one way or another, it's going to cost, it's not going to be less than $1 million to implement, and it may be over 10 million depending on the size of your organization. Nobody's going to give you that money unless you line it up directly to business outcomes. So sometimes what organizations do, they'll create the beautiful PowerPoint, say this is what we got to do, not link it to business outcomes, and what you have is shelfware. you don't move forward. So can't emphasize enough business outcomes. And again, the fact that data mesh, data products in particular, allow us to meet the need, the agility needs and speeds that the business needs. But again, the strategy should be a vehicle for enabling the business, which will, again, give you the funding you need to do what you need to do. Second thing that I see is they tend to bite off more than they can chew. So I have like an intergalactic scope that covers everything from, legacy system data, system modernization to get it all in the cloud, to data quality, to master data management, to AI machine learning and everything in between. And what you end up doing is I like to call it the intergalactic scope that can never be delivered. But ultimately you're biting off more than you can chew. You're promising more than you can deliver. And again, the way to go back to address that is, again, what I mentioned earlier, is go back to what the business cares about, figure out some MVPs, make some modest promises around those MVPs, and structure yourself for test and learn approach, some incrementalism. And then, like I said, explicit growth through this notion of MVPs. That's the key to success in my mind.
Okay, very good. So I have just quick last one question. I have so many questions. Maybe we'll do a part 2, but today I'm already over my time. So my last question is very tactical one. What are the tools off the shelf and you see in market which we can use for data discovery or for catalog? Anything you suggest?
Yeah, so that every single one of my clients asks me that question, and here's the same answer I give. There's no tool off the shelf that you can buy today, and let me explain why. Because the first thing they say, well, what about and I'll just use Calibra, but there's a whole class of tools that I characterize as governance tools. And what they do is they have a macro scope. They talk about enterprise client, and they do collect metadata and such at some level. But really, the audience for that tool is the governance staff. Okay, and it helps the chief data officer, typically that organization, to answer questions around what data do I have, not necessarily how it's used, but what data do I have and what is important to be regulated, secured, made private, et cetera, et cetera. So it addresses that need, but again, the audience that I'm looking at for data products is different. Okay, so the data product catalog, which because I don't like to overlap it with like data catalogs, the Calibra type tools, I call it a data product registry. And it's a registry because for 2 specific reasons. One is it has a user interface, absolutely, but it also has an API, and I'll explain why the API. So the data product registry, first off, is specific to that data product. Okay, it's the one-stop shop that I can go to as a data scientist, data engineer, data analyst, reporting person who needs to go get customer data. In our case, for the example we mentioned before, it's the one-stop shop to go get that data. Okay, to find out what's there, check out to see if that's the data that they need based off of the glossary and the documentation. Maybe even some sample data is shown, and say, yeah, that's the stuff I want. And it actually has commensurate actions within that user interface. Say, I want that data. I'm going to create a access request that automatically flows into a ServiceNow or whatever workflow type tool organizations use. So now I have the data product that shows what is the data that's in the data product, plus the ability to actually action that data. So what I find is the registry does more things than that. It allows you to in the press of a button create a brand new data product. And what I've done before with my prototypes with my clients is we create the data product and we generate the /discover endpoint, the /observe endpoint, the /alerts, usage, logs endpoint. All those come for free. Again, in the spirit of this is what we do is we make it easier. The product registry makes it easier to build, deploy, secure, and manage data products. Okay. And by doing that, we make data easier to share, consume, find, and govern. So the data product registry is the go-to user interface and API for the data product. Now, here's why this is so important. I mentioned the API is, as you can see, what we also do is I have prototypes of this, happy to discuss it at another venue, but we have a prototype that allows you to have, to 10 n number of data products, and we have an enterprise data product registry, and all it does, it's a user interface, okay, and it actually just queries the /discover endpoint and then surfaces the data. So the enterprise data product registry is kind of the parent of all the data product registries, and what it does is it makes it easy to find data products. So there's no tool in the market that does that today, and I know that because I've looked far and wide. I prefer to buy versus build. But in this case, I have had to build the capability to demonstrate what is actually needed at several clients. So again, I call it the data product registry supported by an enterprise data product registry, which is very, very different than a Calibra type tool. Not that there's anything wrong, by the way, with Calibra. It has its place, but don't mistake what it can do well versus what is actually needed here in this context.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much, Eric. This is very helpful. I learned a lot, and I hope our audience must have learned it too. And I will do a part 2 session with you because so many questions came to my mind, but we didn't have enough time to talk to you today. But we'll do part 2 for sure. So thank you very much for your time.
Rafat, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and I look very much forward to our part 2 discussion.